the tribal girls wear. Welcome to my channel.
Jisha channel.
Hi vlog, welcome to my channel. Hi vlog, welcome to my guys.
Hi vlog, welcome to my guys.
Oh, hi vlog, welcome to my guys.
The 10,000 Buddhas Monastery Chinese, Pinyin, WNFS, Jieping, Mon 6 Fat 6 ZI6 is a mid-20th century Buddhist temple located in Sha Tin, Hong Kong, at 220 Pai Tau Village. Its designation as a monastery is actually a misnomer because there are no monks residing at the complex, which groundbreaking and construction of the temple began in 1951 under Yut Kai and his followers, and the structure was finished 6 years later. It closed for 3 years at the end of the 20th century after one of its caretakers was killed in a mudslide caused by poorly maintained slopes nearby. History. Edit. Beginnings 1951-1965. Edit. The monastery was founded in 1951 by the Venerable Yut Kai, II, who moved to Hong Kong from mainland China almost 2 decades before in 1933 to proselytize the teachings of Buddhism. 4-5 The site previously housed a temple to Kuan Yam where a nun. He consequently donated it to Yut Kai for the purpose of establishing a Buddhist college. This, however, did not come to fruition and the monastery was built in its stead, for its foundation took place 2 years after the communist victory and takeover of the mainland. Yut Kai and his followers car. This endeavor was funded through donations from the lay public. 3 The construction of the monastery was eventually completed in 1957-27, although the installation of Buddhist statues throughout the monastery complex continued into the new millennium. 8 Yut Kai died in 1965. 8 years after, an apocryphal story written by his followers claims that his body was found to be incorruptible 8 months after his death, a result of the seated lotus position he was buried in. 9 However, newspapers maintain that he was in fact embalmed. 10-11 His intact body is exhibited in the main hall of popularity. This was partly owing to the disruption caused by the construction of the Sha Tin New Town during the 1970s. 4 Renovations to the monastery buildings were subsequently carried out in 1982, 1997 and 2005. The latest renovation was described by the Antiquities Advisory Board as having calm mudslide and temporary closure 1997-20. Edit. On July 2, 1997, a day after the handover of Hong Kong to China, a mudslide measuring more than 400 cubic meters 14 OCUF struck around the side of the monastery. 12 It was caused by 4 days of heavy rainfall that was equivalent to almost half the city's average annual rainfall of 2.25 meters 7. 4F 13 The slide buried the house of Ma Shuk Fong, the 73-year-old caretaker of the temple who had assumed the position exactly a year before. 12 She was reported missing that same popularity. This was partly owing to the disruption caused by the construction of the Sha Tin New Town during the 1970s. 4 Renovations to the monastery buildings were subsequently carried out in 1982, 1997 and 2005. The latest renovation was described by the Antiquities Advisory Board as having calm. Services Department requested the government flying service to dispatch a helicopter as part of the rescue bid. The plan was subsequently abandoned due to darkness. 14 A helicopter carrying a small digger was deployed to the site the following day. 15 But the area's challenging terrain, namely narrow path encompassing the monastery, severely hindered rescue efforts. 15-16 Ma's body was finally retrieved 4 days later. A coroner later ruled that her death by suffocation under the mud was accidental, but expressed unease over the condition of slopes and pushed for stricter laws to be implemented. The Civil Engineering Department published 2 independent reports in March 1998 revealing that the upkeep of the hillside overlooking the monastery was inadequate. This was partially attributed to the government's method of cutting slopes. The incident resulted in the closure of the monastery for 3 years to carry out repair work on the surrounding slopes in 3 stages. Each phase cost more than HKH 15 million. This outlay was covered by donations from the public, since the monastery does not charge an admission fee for visitors. The lay custodians eventually requested HKH 6 million. By March 2000, 2 small slopes had been overhauled, but work on the larger, more dangerous slopes had yet to begin. The monastery blamed excessive red tape on the part of the buildings department for putting off approval of the reconstruction works. Although the temple was partially opened again a few months after the mudslide, the entire complex was not reopened until July 31, 2000. It can now choose to close in the event of heavy rain. The 10,000 Buddhas Monastery is located on a hillside in Pai Tau Village and is accessible by stairwell consisting of 431 steep steps, 1127. These are surrounded on both sides by statues of arhats, the Buddhist equivalent of saints who have achieved enlightenment. They were seasoned. After a safety assessment, the statues were allowed to remain, and they continued to line the route up to the monastery. The complex covers over 8 hectares 0.80 km2 and is divided over 2 floors. From the government led to a minor rift between the monastery and the local authorities. The latter contended that this was in contravention of the city's building code and that it would create a landslide hazard that could Guangdong provinces and are modeled after one situated at a temple in Kunming, the hometown of founder Yut Kai. The creation and installation of these statues, which commenced in 2001 without prior authorization. The Lonely Planet guidebook surmised that there are some 12,800 statues on the monastery grounds. Several of these originate from the Tang dynasty. In total, there are close to 13,000 Buddha statues at the monastery. 328. This is in spite of the temple's 10,000 title, while 12,000 has been cited as the lower estimation. 710 writers to Kuan Yam and other Buddhist and Taoist deities that contain various Buddha statues, while the lower floor features another hall, a pagoda that is 9 stories high, a tower and 2 pavilions. Cultural references. Edit. The monastery has been featured in films and television series over the years. In the 1995 American action series Vanishing Son, it was the location of a martial arts fight scene between the protagonist played by Russell Wong and a sword-wielding adversary of his 29. Furthermore, the temple was the setting of the opening scene in the 2002 local crime thriller Infernal Affairs. 3031. The triad boss in the film, Han Sam, portrayed by Eric Sang, who is incidentally a devout Buddhist. 32. Prays in front of a statue of Buddha at the temple. His young followers who are also gathered there then toast their loyalty to him, prior to dispersing with instructions from Han to infiltrate the Hong Kong police force as his moles. View of the lower level of the monastery complex from top story of the 9-story pavilion. Kuan Yam Pavilion is in the foreground with the rather gaudily externally decorated 10,000 Buddhist temple in the background. The Reverend Yut Kai, born into a wealthy family in Kunming in southern China in 1878, was a skilled lyre player and talented poet who studied philosophy at one of China's leading universities. At the age of 19, he decided to dedicate his life to Buddhism and is said to have set fire to flesh cut from 2 of his fingers to light 48 oil lamps in front of the Buddha to demonstrate his commitment to the faith. In 1933, Yut Kai moved to Hong Kong to preach Buddhism in a local monastery and soon found many followers. He originally planned to establish a Buddhist college on an estate donated by a wealthy merchant who was also a devout Buddhist, but eventually decided instead to found a monastery, and construction of the 10,000 Buddhas Monastery began in 1949. Yut Kai himself, although by now approaching old age, personally helped in the construction by carrying materials with his disciples, from the foot of the mountain. The monastery buildings were completed in 1957, but it took a further 10 years to complete all the miniature Buddha statues. Now on display around the walls of the main temple, and which actually number almost 13,000 in Cantonese tradition, 10,000 simply represents a figurative term for an extremely large number. The Reverend Yut Kai died on April 24, 1965, 23rd March in the Chinese calendar A. The age of 87. After being buried for 8 months in a coffin on the hillside, his body was exhumed, still in perfect condition, and in accordance with his wishes, embalmed with Chinese lacquer, painted with "Hello. I'm here. I'm here."
The tribal girls.
Yeah.
Where? Welcome to my channel. Hi vlog, welcome to my guys.
Hi vlog, welcome to my guys.
Oh, hi vlog, welcome to my guys.
The age of 87. After being buried for 8 months in a coffin on the hillside, his body was exhumed, still in perfect condition, and in accordance with his wishes, embalmed with Chinese lacquer, painted with gold leaf, draped with robes, and put on display seated in the lotus position in a glass case in front of the main altar. The corpse is named the Diamond Indestructible Body of Yuexi on monastery signs. The preserved corpse of the monastery's founder, Reverend Yut Kai, the Diamond Indestructible Body of Yuexi, is displayed in a glass case in front of the main altar. The monastery was substantially redecorated in 1968. Some of the pavilions were rebuilt and all the statues were repainted or coated with pure gold. Severe flooding and landslides in 1997 caused major damage to the monastery and some buildings were destroyed. The monastery was closed to the public for 2.5 years for reconstruction, which still continues today at the monastery's upper level. The monastery is built over 2 levels on a bamboo forest hillside overlooking Shatin and occupies an area of over 8 hectares. It has 5 temples, 4 pavilions, 1 veranda and a pagoda, and is reached by a steep concrete path with 431 steps. The path is lined on either side with 500 life-size gilded arhat statues. Over 500 gold arhat statues and 431 steps lead the way to the monastery complex. At the top of the path is the lower-level terrace where the main temple 10,000 Buddhas Hall, Avalokitesvara Kuanyam Pavilion, Samantabhadra Pavilion, Manusri Pavilion, 18 Arhat Gallery, Naga Puspa Hall and 9-story pagoda are located. Thank you for watching. Jisha channel, subscribe, 10,000 Buddhas video.